Simon & Schuster Audio presents Star Trek Prime Directive, written and adapted for audio by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens. This program is read by James Doohan.
The following is a Memory Alpha audio data transcript. Code, Starfleet Command. Subcode, 5-year missions. Title, A Historical Analysis. Extract follows.
By this time, of the original 12 starships that had embarked on Starfleet's visionary program of 5-year missions, 5 Constitution-class vessels had already been lost in the service of the Federation. The USS Constellation was the last casualty of an ancient war, sacrificed by her commander to destroy a weapon capable of annihilating whole planets. The Intrepid was consumed by an alien life form in the Gamma 7A system, her entire crew of Vulcans wiped out in one hideous instant. The Excalibur was destroyed in wargame maneuvers during the testing of a flawed multitronic control computer. The Defiant disappeared into interphase space in the Tholian Annex, trapped forever in a dimension beyond our own. And the Enterprise, as far as anyone knew, was hopelessly crippled during the tragic incident at Talon 4. Yet, despite such high cost, the returns to the Federation from the 5-year mission's epic exploration and expansion were always greater. Thus, new starships could always be commissioned. And for new crews, there was never any shortage of those beings who were driven by the Federation's greatest dream: to know more, to explore to the farthest limits, and then to go beyond. At the Federation Starfleet Academy, they called this dream Le Rêve d'Étoile, the dream of stars. And it was at the Academy that planners created the system that would guide a select few of those extraordinary beings who were driven by the dream of stars to the only role that could fulfill their fire and purpose: Starship Captain. Starfleet and its Academy ensured that the Federation's planners could boldly set their course for the future, creating new missions and building new ships. They knew that there would be no end to those who would volunteer to take part, because the dream of stars, once acknowledged, could never be denied. But what the planners did not yet know by this time was that once the dream had been experienced, neither could it ever be willingly surrendered. It was a lesson the planners were eventually due to learn, and their system had already created the man who would teach it to them, once and for all.
Memory Alpha transcript ends.
Part 1, Aftermath. The Enterprise had been butchered, and Chief Engineer Montgomery Scott found himself thinking that it might have been better if she had died all at once, and he with her. In the silence of the aft observation lounge, deserted in the ship's early morning cycle, Scott leaned his head against the cool smoothness of the large viewport. He closed his eyes, thinking of another time when he might have touched any part of the ship and felt within her the hum of her generators, powered by the wedding song of matter and antimatter. But there were no vibrations now. That life had fled. Scott opened his eyes again. His breath had fogged the viewport, and the haze it made suddenly flared silver-white as the Enterprise's orbit took her over Talon's moon into the full reflected sunlight of Talon's sun. It cruelly showed how the blue-white gleam of the ship's hull metal was streaked with black from the energy arcs that had penetrated her overloaded shields just before the end. Scott's trained eye scanned the upper surface of the engineering hull, evaluating the inelegant arrangement of roughly bonded pressure plates and repair bands. He cringed at the imperfection of the work. It was Starbase mechanics who worked on her now. Scott and only a handful of others were all that remained on board of the Enterprise's original crew. At least, Scott thought again for the thousandth time, at least, if I had been on the bridge when it happened, then this would be over for me too. And I'd be with the captain, wherever the poor lad is. Behind him, the observation lounge door puffed open, and Scott cringed, knowing it could only be one person. "Good morning, Mr. Scott. The work is proceeding nicely, wouldn't you say?" Scott took a breath to calm himself. In the viewport's reflection, he saw the glowing lights of that ridiculous swagger stick spin through the air as Lieutenant Stiles flipped it under his arm. It was a damned annoying affectation on a starship. But then Stiles was a damned annoying man. I suppose it is." "You don't sound too pleased, Mr. Scott." Scott hated the smug smile that split the man's sharp features. "There's only one way to treat this ship, Mr. Stiles. You don't feel my chaps are treating this ship the right way?" Then Stiles turned to Scott, and the chief engineer stared in shock as he saw that Stiles no longer wore the stylized Comet insignia of the USS Monitor on his gold command shirt. He wore the insignia of the Enterprise. "Like it? Starfleet has reassigned me. I'm commanding the Enterprise now." No, Scott thought. Never. "A ship needs a captain, Lieutenant." "An operational ship needs a captain, Mr. Scott. And the Enterprise is anything but. The experts have made up their minds, then?" "In a manner of speaking. The decision has been made to detach what's remaining of the port nacelle. Of course, the tugs will take the ship out of the system first, just in case." Scott had to look away. They were gambling with all that was left of the Enterprise. "In case she slingshots into warp, what do they think is going to happen to her then that hasn't happened already?" "If the ship does slingshot, then it's apt to be an unfocused transition. The experts from the Cochrane Institute have calculated that the starbow effect could be quite spectacular, and the officials from the First Contact Office feel that every step should be taken to ensure that the event is not observable from the surface of Talon 4. The Prime Directive's taken enough of a beating down there as it is, wouldn't you say? And if the ship doesn't slingshot, then there happen to be 2 Constitution-rated warp nacelles at Earth space dock. But they're intended for the Intrepid too." "Come now, Mr. Scott. It would take more time than a year to finish a new ship from scratch. But with new nacelles and a full wiring team of construction drones, the Enterprise could be back in service in a tenth that time." Scott stared at the man, suddenly seeing the real reason for his good spirits. "And then, of course, she'd be needing a new captain, wouldn't she?" "Well, thank you for your vote of confidence, Mr. Scott, though I'm afraid I'd just be first officer to begin with. But in time, she would be mine. Oh, yes. And then we'd see how the Enterprise could perform with a real captain at her helm." Scott had a difficult decision to make, and in the end, he decided not to deck Stiles. There were more honorable ways to attempt to leave the service than by striking another officer, though for the moment, he couldn't think of one more satisfying. Lieutenant Style, sir. Yes? When the time comes for the port nacelle to be detached, go on. With all respect, sir, I hope she slingshots you all the way to hell. As Stiles sputtered, Scott squared his shoulders and marched unhurriedly from the observation lounge. There was nothing more that Starfleet could do to him that hadn't already been done to his ship. Later, in the privacy of his quarters, Scott stared at his personal view screen. Screen on. The view screen came to life, still displaying the final transmission feed he had requested last night. The source was Sensor Satellite 2, one of 8 the Enterprise had placed into orbit around Talon 4, 500,000 kilometers distant from its moon. The satellite was in a fixed geostationary position above the planet's main ocean. And almost 4 months earlier, Scott had seen the images it had obtained of Talon 4's surface sea vessels. The satellite could also pick up the heat trails of submersible vehicles deep beneath the ocean's surface, and even identify the nation-states to which they belonged, and the weaponry each carried. But now the oceans of Talon 4 had no vessels, submersible or otherwise, and the stockpiled weaponry had all been expended, creating dense globe-encircling clouds. Where the planet's sun could still shine through, the once blue ocean was stained deep purple by an unknown algae-like organism. It had blossomed through all of Talon's seas and had swiftly overwhelmed the planet's radiation-devastated ecosystem. Undoubtedly, there were other ecological outrages unfolding just as dramatically throughout the rest of Talon 4's biosphere. Suddenly, Scott noticed the words printed out on the screen to identify the feed. Sensor Satellite 2, Kirk's World. He slapped his hand against the base of the machine, hitting its manual switch to off, hard enough to make the screen shake. "You slimy sons of..." His voice choked off in anger. Kirk's World. He had heard the replacement crew using that hateful name for Talon 4, and now they had gone so far as to program it into the automated logs. Well, he'd program a worm to go through the computer and delete all such references. He'd take Stiles' name out of the duty roster as well and transfer him to kitchen operations. "I'll turn the ship upside down before I'll..." What's the use? He'd been about to say, "before I'll let them win." But the truth was, they already had. Computer.
Working.
Prepare a hard copy message to Vice Admiral Hammersmith, Starbase 29. From Scott, etc. Message goes, effective immediately. I wish to tender my resignation from
Clarification.
Aye, what is it?
Starfleet Command Regulation 106, Paragraph 1, specifically identifies the role of the Chief Engineer as subject to preeminent exception to term of service procedures as detailed in Starfleet Command.
Computer, could you digest that gobbledygook for me?
The Chief Engineer cannot resign while the Enterprise is undergoing a Class 2 refit.
Scott put his elbow on the desk and rested his head on his hand. Even Starfleet equipment seemed out to get him. But he had picked up a few tricks in his years with Kirk, especially when it came to Kirk's way with computers. Computer, if I resign, effective immediately, then I will no longer be the Chief Engineer when Hammersmith receives my message. Therefore, he will not be empowered to prevent my resignation. But the computer didn't hesitate for a microsecond.
That is a circular argument.
Well then, let me put it to you this way. If you don't transmit my message to the Vice Admiral, then I shall rewire you into a food processor. This time, The computer remained silent. "Well, computer, what are you doing?"
Scanning personnel records of Montgomery Scott to determine level of technical proficiency in the reconstruction of organic materials synthesizers from computer circuitry.
And? The computer reset its audio circuits.
Message as dictated reads, effective immediately, I wish to tender my resignation from STAR. Please proceed.
"Thank you, computer." Scott turned back to the patient view screen that had displayed the words he had dictated. Though it was difficult for the engineer to admit it, for the first time, machinery wasn't enough. He no longer belonged on board the Enterprise. What had made this ship so special, so alive, was her crew and her captain. The spirit of her would live just as well somewhere else, as long as they could be together again. And they would be together, Scott suddenly realized. They had to be. Scott smiled. The first time he had felt like it in months. Then he spoke the rest of the words that would separate him from Starfleet. So like Spock and Kirk and McCoy and all the rest, he would be free to do what duty demanded of him. Find the answer. James Kirk remembered the Farragut, the first real ship he had served on. A Constitution-class starship much like the Enterprise. He had been a Green lieutenant and had spent his first 6 months managing supply crates in the ship's cargo bay. He found it somehow fitting that he had returned there now, in spirit if not in fact. Surprised that he had retained so much of an almost 15-year-old skill, Kirk deftly managed the controls of a Mark IV tractor beam web to receive, sort, and secure the rapid stream of cargo crates being loaded onto the freighter, SS Ian Shelton, from a commercial space dock orbiting the colony world of Intrader 2. As Kirk worked the controls, the voice of the orbital transfer controller came over the communicator link on the Mark IV's console. "How are you doing in there, Shelton?" "All conditions are not... everything's okay so far." Kirk still had to concentrate to keep from falling into the old patterns of speech. "Okay, hotshot. The last load's coming through now. Looks like you set a new record." As he manipulated the final crates into position, Kirk heard the cargo bay control room doors slide open behind him. It was Anne Gavreau, the ship's captain, and his employer of the day. She was a few years older than Kirk, with just a few telltale strands of white in otherwise sandy and curly short hair. And she wore a beat-up flight jacket with an impressive number of colorful patches from all the different systems she had traveled to. From the corner of his eye, Kirk saw Gavreau standing by the cargo bay viewport to watch him stack the last of the crates with the tractor beams. "Nice arrangement of crates, Leonard. Perfectly balanced distribution of mass." Gavreau seemed to study Kirk for a moment, then said, "If you're interested, the Shelton needs a cargo master." "Why? This ship's fully automated. You only need a cargo master when you're in port, and there's lots around to hire." Kirk knew that from experience. He had spent 5 days waiting for employment in the dock workers' pool at the Colony World Space Dock, suffering the indignity of paying for food, water, and oxygen. "Well, that's a new one. Usually I'm in the position of telling people like you why I don't want to sign them on board. Look, the Shelton's next stop is Hanover. At Wharf 4, we can be there in just under 15 days. Kirk thought for a moment. Hanover would put him about a light year closer to Starbase 29 without having to pay for passage. I'll take the job. Good decision. Gavreau had a mysterious look in her eye. It's the same one I would have made. One day out from the colony world of Intrader 2, cruising steadily under automatic pilot at Warp 4, the SS Ian Shelton was deep in interstellar space. Gavreau's freighter was little more than an unadorned cylindrical hull with a central bridge tower, stuck amidships, as if it had been no more than an afterthought. But still, Kirk preferred being on the freighter's cramped bridge, where he could see the stars move past the view screen, even if he did have to put up with the 3 black and orange cats that had free run of the ship. Kirk heard footsteps behind him on the ladder leading up to the bridge. It had to be Gavreau. She was the only other person on board. "Hi, Leonard. Thought you might be interested in a game of chess. We're coming up to a course correction soon. Thought I'd monitor it, and then?" "Certainly." Gavreau crouched down by a chair at the impulse station to scratch the ears of the 2 cats sleeping there. One of the cats shifted its position to place a second ear beneath Gavreau's fingers, but neither cat opened its eyes to acknowledge their benefactor. "Give me a dog any day," Kirk thought. One of the cats wrapped its paws around Gavreau's hand and gave it an experimental chew. "Are they any particular breed or clone branch?" Kirk asked. "No," Gavreau said. "That's the nice part. They're an old-fashioned natural mix from Earth. Fairly hard to get these days." "What are their names?" This is Comac, this is Fitzpatrick, and Nagura is below deck sleeping on the mass converter." "Comac, Fitzpatrick, and Nagura?" Kirk repeated. Gavreau smiled because one of her secrets had just been revealed, and Kirk realized he'd revealed one of his own by his immediate reaction to the names. The cats were each named after a Starfleet admiral. "How long were you in Starfleet?" 21 years. "That's a long time." "Took me that long to figure out I wasn't going to get what I wanted." She tapped her fist against the impulse control console. "One of these. A ship of my own." "But there are hundreds of ships in Starfleet." "True. But at the time I left, there were only 13 that mattered." "Ah," Kirk said. No wonder he liked her. She was just like him. "I exec'd on the Yorktown for Decker," Gavreau explained. That gave me a taste for it. Then, when Decker made Commodore and transferred to the Constellation, I was certain I'd get his chair. I knew the ship and had the experience, but they offered me the Hawking instead. Kirk nodded in understanding. The Hawking was a science vessel with a crew of just over 100. Its mission was restricted to worlds without intelligent life, of which had already been exposed to the Federation. For a scientist or technical specialist, it was a near-perfect posting. But for an explorer, it was the equivalent to being condemned to perpetual second place. I protested. I sent subspace memos to command, demanding a review, and after due consideration, blah, 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 nothing changed. Decker said he'd take me with him to the Constellation, but I knew I couldn't be second. Not again. And as things turned out, maybe I did the right thing by not going with him. Decker was a good officer, a good man. The entire crew of the Constellation had been killed by an ancient and alien war machine. Decker had sacrificed the ship and his life to avenge their deaths. "I know." And then to cover his slip, Kirk added, "I was in Starfleet, too." Gavreau stared at Kirk as if coming to a decision. "I know you were, Captain Kirk." Kirk felt the hair on the back of his neck bristle. "How long have you known who I am?" "Since I saw you in the dock workers' pool. But don't worry. I know you, Kirk. At least I know your type. You're like me. The kind of officer that gives the Admiralty their gray hairs. You've got to be resourceful and inventive enough to run the show when you're weeks away from getting advice and orders from Starfleet Command. But when you get those orders, you have to be the kind of person who'll follow them even if you don't agree. It's an almost impossible mix. Like matter and antimatter." "What's your point, Captain?" "My point is, whatever else you might be, maverick, impetuous, stubborn, and all those other things starship captains have to be, you're not a world killer. I know what you had to go through to get the Enterprise. I know what I went through to get even this close to a starship of my own." She held up 2 fingers, a centimeter apart. "And I know the system doesn't let maniacs get that close, or go so far. For all that I have my reservations about Starfleet, even I have to admit the system works." "Well, if the system works as well as you say, then why don't you accept what Starfleet's hearing on Talon concluded?" "I accept most of the hearing's conclusions. Talon 4 was an inhabited, technologically advanced world, a few decades at most from first contact. The Enterprise went to the Talon system, and within 5 days, Talon 4 was a graveyard for an entire civilization." "But you don't accept that it was my fault." "Do you?" "No." The word hung in the silence of the small bridge. "Then why be surprised that I think the same thing?" "Because the Admiralty thinks otherwise." "I said, I thought the Starfleet system works. The Admiralty is another matter." "Come on, Kirk. Don't be so defensive. I'm on your side. That's why I brought you on board, all right? I figured if you were already out so far in this sector, then you would probably appreciate getting another parsec or 2 closer to Talon. Because that's where you're going, isn't it? That's where I'd be going." Kirk watched the stars on the view screen. He asked himself what he would have done if Starfleet had reassigned him to another patrol ship years ago instead of giving him the Enterprise. Would he have stuck it out in a second-place command, hoping for another chance? Or would he have done what Gavreau had done, resigned and taken command some other way? He decided he would have ended up here on the Ian Shelton, or a ship just like her, a winner by the only rules that counted, his own. "I do appreciate it, thank you." But Gavreau could sense the question building in Kirk. "How can you be so sure about me? You don't have the slightest idea about what really happened on Talon 4. "But I will, won't I? If I were you, I'd want someone else to know the whole story. And I tell you, Kirk, 14 days in space on an automated ship is a long, long time. Not as long as my 5 days at Talon 4, Kirk thought. But Gavreau was right. It was time for Kirk to tell his story. Part 2, The Last Mission. It had all begun 3.5 months earlier, when the Enterprise had first been ordered into the Talon system under a complete communications blackout. Captain's Log Supplemental. In 6 hours, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and I will travel by shuttle to Outpost 47, a Starfleet First Contact office base hidden on the moon of Talon 4. From that base, more than 100 FCO researchers have spent 8 years studying Talon 4's civilization, which is a collection of cultures and nation-states with many similarities to late 20th century Earth, including the fact that the planet's two major political powers are poised on the brink of a thermonuclear war which could wipe out all life on their world. As we approach Talon 4, I can feel an unusual excitement building in the crew. For some reason, they have taken an extremely personal interest in this mission, and the turnout at the background briefing sessions run by Lieutenant Carolyn Palamas has been most impressive. I am planning to attend her next presentation myself. Lieutenant Carolyn Palamas had been the ship's anthropology and archaeology officer from the start of the 5-year mission. In that time, Kirk could remember her accompanying him on a handful of landing parties, most notably the mission to Pollux 4, when the Enterprise had encountered an alien who might well have been known to ancient humans as the Greek god Apollo. Palamas was also an attractive, blonde-haired and blue-eyed human, and well-liked by her staff and crew. But still, Kirk knew there had to be more than just her popularity to account for the crew's unprecedented interest in the lieutenant's lectures about Talon 4. When Kirk entered the Enterprise's theater, he had to silently refuse a dozen crew members who immediately offered to give him their seats. He preferred to lean back against one of the back walls. At least there, he could sneak out again if the presentation weren't interesting. He noticed Spock sitting off to the side in the second row, close to the podium. Surprisingly, Dr. McCoy was sitting beside the science officer. At the podium, Lieutenant Palamas was just coming to the end of her briefing. And finally, coming up on the screen now, is a computer composite of a typical set of Talon 4's dominant intelligent species. On the large view screen behind Palamas, an image appeared of 2 reddish-skinned Talon adults and 1 green-skinned child. Lying beside them was what appeared to be an incompletely formed larval version of a Talon. However, according to the scale grid, the softly rounded pale white form was the same size as the 2 adults on the screen, about 2.5 meters high. Each adult's reptilian face was the shape of a smoothly curving, forward-sloping egg, sliced by a wide, lipless mouth which opened and shut, revealing an upper and lower row of small, sharp teeth. The face was dominated by a pair of large, yellow eyes, twice the size of a human's, and dotted by small black central pupils. The child's face had less slope, no teeth, and much larger eyes. Palamas read from her screenpad notes. As you can see, the Talon are saurian bipeds, sharing some of the characteristics of Terran lizards and birds, notably in the loose folds of pebbly textured skin and the thin, delicate skeletal structure. Also, as is typical on more than 90% of Class M planets, there are 2 sexes on Talon 4, and the female parent carries the live young to term. An ensign wearing a red support services shirt raised her hand, and Palamas nodded at her. Then what's that 4th figure on the screen? The one that looks like a large egg casing? What we're looking at here is an adult hibernation cocoon. Many of the life forms on Talon 4 can release a substance which hardens into a shell that protects them during the seasons when water virtually disappears from the planet's equatorial deserts. The Talon themselves still retain this capability. However, because of their relatively advanced technology, such as extensive irrigation projects and climate-controlled housing, a hibernation cocoon like this one is rarely seen among the Talon except in cases of extreme trauma or illness. There also seem to be some cultural taboos about the nature of the cocoon of which we can't be sure, because the Talon themselves are reluctant to discuss them in their own broadcast transmissions. Unfortunately, those public sources offer the only data that FCO has been able to study in detail so far. Someone called out from the audience without bothering to raise his hand. Well, that's only because the Enterprise hasn't gotten there yet. Kirk smiled at his crew's enthusiasm. One of the Enterprise's functions on this mission would be to place sensor satellites in orbit around Talon 4 to gather more detailed information than the FCO had been able to obtain through their monitoring station on Talon's moon. We're out of time for now, so I'd like to thank you all for your attendance today. Tomorrow, I'll continue with an overview of the planet's rating on the Richter scale of culture. Kirk moved against the flow of people leaving the auditorium so he could join Spock and McCoy. Both officers were now in a private discussion with Palamas at the podium as she gathered up her screen pad and microtapes. As Kirk approached, he heard them discuss the Talon's chances of surviving the war they faced. He joined the conversation. Tell me, Lieutenant, is the situation on Talon actually that precarious? We've seen dozens of worlds successfully pass through tense political situations, and the Talon cultures do appear to be stable. Palamas frowned as she straightened her pile of microtapes. Captain, we have also seen dozens of worlds fail to survive situations similar to the one Talon is experiencing. I think that's why the crew has become so caught up in our mission to Talon 4. We're all hoping that the Talon will survive their present difficulties, the way Earth did. And, well, go on, please. Kirk smiled to encourage her to continue. I think some of the crew are hoping that this might turn into a first contact mission, sir. Why would anyone think we're on a first contact mission? The Talon people have barely left the orbit of their own planet. They're still under the jurisdiction of the First Contact Office. I know, Captain, but there is also a better than 50% chance that the opposing sides on Talon will become involved in an all-out fusion war within the next 6 months. And since membership in the Federation has been shown to have a calming influence on a planet's regional disputes, some of the crew feel that perhaps to save the Talon, we'd reveal ourselves? Well, yes. Something like that. Kirk turned to Spock, a concerned look on his face. Spock, according to the FCO projections, when might the Talon be expected to be able to learn that there are spacefaring cultures in their vicinity? At the minimum estimation, Captain, the Talon are at least 20 to 30 standard years from achieving the required technological breakthroughs. Kirk turned to Lieutenant Palamas, still serious. 20 to 30 years, Lieutenant. I'm surprised the crew isn't more aware of General Order Number 1. Oh, they're aware, Captain Kirk. A lot of them just can't see the point of non-interference if it means an entire race might die. Given the severity of the situation, they think that Starfleet and the Federation Council might make an exception to the Prime Directive. Spock placed his hands behind his back. Everyone turned to him, knowing he was about to speak. As soon as an exception is made, Lieutenant, it is no longer the Prime Directive. As a historian, you should be aware of the tragedies that inevitably result when a more powerful culture attempts to set standards for those that cannot stand against it. The Federation cannot presume to have either the moral or ethical right to proclaim what other cultures should do until those cultures have achieved a level of development sufficient enough to consider what we have to offer. Then they must be free to turn us down without feeling forced to capitulate in order to gain our advanced technology and knowledge. For those reasons, among many others, the Prime Directive is a most logical and necessary position. Kirk could see the fire building in the lieutenant's eyes as she responded to Spock's lecture. But as a historian, Mr. Spock, I am also aware that it was an uncrewed Vulcan robot probe that prevented a cometary fragment from wiping out half of Central Europe in the early 1900s. The diverted fragment struck an uninhabited region of Siberia, and that changed the future history of the entire Earth. But Spock was not swayed. That incident was a preventable natural disaster, not in any way caused by the humans of the time. And the Prime Directive explicitly directs us to protect emerging cultures from similar disasters, provided we do not reveal ourselves. Indeed, the Enterprise herself has done so many times in the past. Upset now, but trying not to let it show, the lieutenant conceded the argument. All I meant is that I shall be very sad if we are forced to do nothing as we witness an entire race commit suicide. As shall I, Lieutenant, Spock said. And Kirk knew it was a rare admission for the science officer to make to someone he did not know well. As Palamas left them, Kirk fell silent, thinking about what she had said. The lieutenant wouldn't be the only crew member who would be upset if the Enterprise were forced to do nothing but watch as a world destroyed itself. But it won't come to that, Kirk told himself. It can't come to that. He was a starship captain. He would not allow it. Chief Engineer's Personal Log Supplemental. We are now in orbit around the moon of Talon 4, and while Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, and their landing party are at the First Contact Office outpost here, I am in temporary command of the Enterprise. While the ship remains in excellent working order and the crew's morale is high, I'm beginning to have some misgivings about this mission, which I believe the Captain and Mr. Spock share. In the almost 5 years I have served under Captain Kirk, this ship has never been forced to operate under such severe blackout conditions. In addition to shutting down all equipment that might generate electromagnetic signals the Talon could detect, we are also prevented from using most of our sensors, our broad-beam subspace communicators, and our transporters, which is why the landing party is now underway to the outpost by shuttle. What none of us can understand, including Mr. Spock, I might add, is why the First Contact Office is concerned that the Talon people might be able to detect the subspace radiation produced by our devices. All reports indicate that their technology could not possibly be that advanced. However, there is always the possibility they have obtained advanced technology from elsewhere.